It's a dispiriting irony that our nation has the most expensive and well-developed system of legal education in the world, and yet does such a poor job of delivering services to the group that needs them most. I speak particularly of the 4/5 of the needs of low-income people that are unaddressed, but also middle-income. Individuals are not well dealt with by our current system, and some of the blame for that goes with legal education. We have produced an incredibly costly structure that both under and over prepares students. It over prepares people who are doing routine services that are needed most by many poor and low and middle income people, and yet leaves them unprepared to deal with the complexities of a world in which the practice has become increasingly global, in which mentoring is less valued in professional organizations, so there's more pressure and expectation that there'll be something close to practice ready. And we aren't doing a very good job of training lawyers in professional skills, sometimes called soft skills, but for lawyers, they're often the hard skills. Collaboration, problem solving, leadership, project management. It's another irony that the occupation that produces the most leaders in American society does so little to explicitly prepare them for that role, and that's something that the paper that's the organizing framework for this conference underscored. Leadership development is a $45 billion industry, and law schools have come very late to the parade. It's missing in most schools, even though they preach that they are training leaders. Only a handful of schools do anything explicitly to do that. Values are frequently taught more in subtext than in texts outside of the professional responsibility course. They're oftentimes missing from the legal curriculum. So what to do about all of this? We focused on a couple of things. First of all, the structure of legal education we thought is increasingly out of touch with the needs of contemporary workplaces. We've got a one-size-fits-all model for a profession which is extremely variegated, specialized, and the same skills that are needed to do routine divorce and closing, real estate closings in a small town in Idaho are not the same skills that a Wall Street M&A lawyer needs, and yet we pretend that we should train them all the same way. We have a system of bar examinations that for too many schools requires teaching to the exams and does very little to actually gauge readiness for practice. And of course, the elephant in the room is not only the ABA accreditation process, but also the U.S. News and World Report ranking system, which creates some perverse incentives for schools to actually have higher per pupil expenditures, for example. So we need to fix all of that. We came to a tentative conclusion that we needed 1-year, 2-year, and 3-year programs. We might have graduates of the 1-year or 2-year programs called something a little differently. Licensed legal technicians, which are being pioneered in the state of Washington, might be a model that we could follow. They essentially have a 1-year curriculum. We were not unmindful of concerns about creating stratifications among law schools, but as many of us noted, we've already got that system thanks to U.S. News and World Report, and we might as well recognize in structure what's true in practice, that we're preparing people for very different professionals. professional settings, and we need to adapt accordingly. We thought we ought to do much more to remedy some of the curricular gaps that I mentioned. So we need more emphasis on professional skills. We need to think more creatively about what can be done online more cheaply and what can be best done in a residential educational model. We all were big boosters of clinics, and although they're the most expensive form of legal education, they're also what graduates tell us is the most valuable, and quite a number of us thought that clinics should be required, as they are now not. By all law school graduates. We'd include simulations, which reduces the expense. Not every school can afford live client models, but we do think we need much more attention to the kinds of skills that clinics teach. We also thought we needed to do a better job of teaching comparative law and preparing students for work in a global profession. We need more attention to technology. We need more attention to interdisciplinary approaches. And of course, something we'll have to give, especially if we're thinking about how to shorten the curriculum. So we need to think creatively about how to integrate these materials into the standard core curriculum and not just have add-on courses for each and every one. And finally, we focused some on strategies for inclusion. We know, for example, that women and students of color participate less in class, and we know that for many students, and our student from Harvard talked movingly about what's being done to address the justice gap, the lack of attention to justice in the curriculum at Harvard. Among the strategies we talked about were breaking large classes into small groups and then having them report back, having students take time to think about an answer and even write it down or talk to the person seated next to them to break down some of the barriers to participation. And we finally talked about the need to think about education as a lifelong process, and that some skills, such as leadership, are best taught to people who've been out in the real world. So we needed a system of continuing education that looks very different than the watered-down CLE mandatory model that too many practitioners now sit through while checking their BlackBerries. Something that more approximates the kind of executive education that Harvard is doing and that other schools would love to do if we could figure out how to do it on a cost-effective basis, is something that should be on the horizon for legal education. And to make all of this happen, we think we need more stakeholders' involvement in the process. We've delegated too much control to the profession over the control of its own regulatory and educational structure, and we need some alternative voices and alternative visions. And we need to figure out some way to address the political challenges that this agenda poses. And we ran out of time before we could even begin to think about that. Right.
Hi, I'm Becca. I'm a second-year law student here. And I think Deborah had done an excellent job of summarizing what it is that we had discussed. I think another way, so we had consensus basically on the fact that we need to be having these conversations. I think something we didn't have consensus about, nor should we, is really what is driving what those changes will be. Is it markets? Is it schools? Is it judges and firms and people who are hiring after I think Deborah had brought up, is it the bar? Scott had brought up, where are clients really in all of this in terms of like what their needs are. So it seems like those are some of the conversations that we need to be having, and also there just needs to be a lot more information and data and research in terms of figuring those things out. Although there are also possibilities, like Deborah had mentioned the triple LT model in Washington. That's something that I'm writing a student note on now. It's kind of like a paralegal plus model. Part of what's so exciting about this conversation is that it's an acknowledgement of the opportunity to really reimagine the profession, what it takes, and even outside the profession, how people can be working with and interacting with legal services. And to me, what's also really exciting about the triple LT model is that it's not just starting the conversation, it's actually an experiment. And what that model is doing is integrating some of the very things that we had discussed, including shortening the curriculum, having a little bit more specialty, reaching out to people who might not have otherwise gone to law school. Also looking at online, I believe a big part of the first part of that curriculum is online, so they're experimenting with how that would work. And then also just they have a third-year apprenticeship that's required, essentially, and looking at what that would entail. We'd also talked about how the clinics, while they're one of the more expensive additions that law schools can have, are one of the most valuable. We'd also discussed how there almost seems to be a relationship with the things that have made the 3-year JD valuable. A lot of that is what has made law school so expensive, and that tuition had actually been quite lower many, many years ago, but things like clinics and mental health services and things that have really made it a valuable experience for people and help people thrive while they're in it is part of what is making it so expensive. But there might be, as Deborah had mentioned, ways to start integrating some of that into the things that already exist. So in many ways, it was a very inspiring conversation. Lots to imagine.
Sure, of course. I think our discussion was perhaps more daunting than inspiring. The topic was creative approaches to measuring values as well as economics. Most of us, when we graduated from law school, really weren't, and decided to go into corporate law, big law firm practice, weren't really aware of profitability, didn't really think about short-term economic issues. Anyone who graduated from law school after 1987, when the American lawyer conceived the brilliant idea of publishing or guesstimating every major law firm's profits per partner, and law firms and law firm managing partners and law firm rank and file partners began to measure the success of their institution based on their average profitability, the world changed. And way back in the good old days, I think a lot of us viewed the practice of law in a law firm very much as a profession. And gradually it has morphed into a business. In many instances, it has morphed into a cutthroat bottom line business where values really don't matter, and the holy grail will be billable hours, dollars generated, realization rates, and the like. And I don't think anyone went to law school in pursuit of those particular attributes or goals. So the world has definitely changed, and the article that was written that we're here to discuss today is incredibly valuable because it really forces us to stop and think from a law firm perspective, what have we become, where have we gone, and is there any way that we can stop this trend? And all law firms are different. We heard a lot of discussions in our group how there is no one size law firm, one cultural law firm fits all. What we try to figure out at the beginning is what are the values that law firms ought to seek to promote other than short-term economic profitability, and how do you reward investments that are designed to incentivize or achieve those beneficial values that may be inconsistent with short-term economic profitability or may even materially reduce short-term economic profitability, and how do you accomplish that in today's environment? The first thing we tried to tackle is what are those values? And we largely had a consensus around the following values that are worth promoting and aspiring towards: quality lawyering, professional satisfaction, recruiting, training, developing, mentoring of new lawyers, diversity, promoting work-life balance, engaging in pro bono work and pro bono causes, inclusiveness, encouraging participation in professional activities, bar associations, more intense community engagement, and the like. Those are all very noble values. Law firms to varying degrees care about them. Many law firms don't care about them at all. We're in a situation now where 25 years ago, most law firms in the United States were variants of lockstep compensation systems. Today, more frequently, you'll have variants of, choice of a better phrase, eat what you kill compensation systems. Now, in the latter type of compensation system, you really are rewarding business generators, business generated, dollars generated, billable hours produced, realization rates for particular matters. The values that we identified and cataloged as being important and beneficial, not just to the law firm, not just to life within the law firm, but to the legal profession and society more broadly, those are of no value in the eat what you kill type of law firm. So we all recognize that we live in a real world, and you have to try to deal with issues that you can deal with and not tackle the things that are impossible. So one issue is, I think we all agree that a particular law firm's compensation model really does drive behavior within that law firm, and it incentivizes and rewards certain type of conduct. So to the extent you can refine the compensation model in ways that would promote, incentivize, reward the values I identified, that would be a crucial first step. I spent a little bit of time, I pulled out we have a variant of a lockstep compensation system, and we send a note to all partners every year when they're going to summarize the work they did over the past year, telling them what our compensation committee believes is important and ought to be incentivized. It's 3 sentences, but I just want to read it and raise it because I think this goes to the heart of what we're trying to reward and incentivize. Compensation decisions will be made based on the following factors: the partner's role in servicing, expanding, and developing substantial client relationships and matters that are consistent with firm and departmental goals, the quality of the work performed by the partner, and the partner's willingness to make personal sacrifices in time and other commitments to enhance the firm and preserve and expand client relationships. 2, the partner's role in practice development, external client development, and enhancing the firm's profile, including social, professional client interactions, public speaking, participation in bar activities, conference participation, preparation of articles, client advisories, and other written materials, involvement in professional organizations and pro bono causes, development and support of practice groups, participation in charitable organizations, and community service. And 3rd, the partner's other contributions to the firm, including introducing clients to other partners and departments of the firm, participating in firm management and administration, sharing work and firm resources with other partners, promoting collegiality among the partners, associates, and staff, training and mentoring of associates, recruiting, and timely billing, collection, and partner self-reporting. A lot of those values coincide with the values that the group thought were important. We spent a lot of time on how do you accomplish that. Even if you have the right compensation system, how do you still accomplish those values and make sure that the partners and the lawyers within the firm understand that this is the firm's culture and these are the values that matter? A number of people talked about you need inspiration. You need inspiration from managing partners and chairs. You need inspiration from department heads and practice group heads. And you need inspiration from powerful partners within the organization. We talked about celebrating successes. And we don't mean billable successes or client successes necessarily. If a partner or an associate achieves a major pro bono accomplishment, celebrate it, trumpet it to the firm. Show the firm that these things matter. It is not about chasing the almighty dollar, that there are a lot of other values that are very important and need to be celebrated within the framework of the firm. Pro bono. Make sure that you can collaborate with your key clients on pro bono causes, pro bono matters. Collaborate with your clients on matters outside of simply billable matters. Build fences. It's good for business. It's also very good, frankly, for developing bonds, connections, networks. It enables your associates to have interaction with clients, which is important. For community engagement, have firms match charitable contributions that associates, staff might want to make. There was a lot of discussion about how good values, a firm's good values, they're not just good inherently, intrinsically, innately, they're really good for business. And to the extent we had clients in our group, the clients indicated that having a firm with good values is a heck of a lot more important than having a firm that has high profits per partner. Upward review of partners. How do you measure mentoring, training, commitment, caring about an associate's satisfaction? Meaningful upward review and figuring out how to do that in a way that is still anonymous and doesn't run the risk of getting associates in trouble. Have law firms, which are quite profitable, take some of their substantial profits and make investments in worthwhile causes, whether it be Legal Aid Society, whether it be some of these new quasi-legal initiatives that are designed to provide legal services to the underserved and underrepresented. Corporate responsibility. Encourage law firms, have clients encourage law firms to issue corporate responsibility reports that really will publicly hold law firms responsible for making sure that they're striving for more than the last possible dollar. On the pro bono front, make sure that pro bono hours are not distinguished from billable hours. Have a category, all legal hours. And pro bono hours count every bit as much as billable hours, and frankly, professional responsibilities and activities count every bit as much as billable hours. Provide leadership training for all lawyers from the earliest stages. Teach them how to be accountable and responsible and how to lead others, and also foster inclusiveness. Make sure everyone in the firm, from a secretary to the senior-most partner, really understands what the firm's vision is all about, understands what the firm's value is all about. And now that I'm out of time, we did have a Harvard Business School professor who said we ought to study empirically how law firm compensation systems incentivize certain conducts. I'm not aware of any really systematic study on that issue because law firms tend to be quite secretive about their compensation system, but I do see a camera in the back, so I guess Paul Weiss is no longer as secretive as we were a few minutes ago. Thanks.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. So we had a really interesting discussion with I'm sorry. I'm Pallav. I'm a master's student from India. I've been a litigator for about 4 years before I came here, and trying to reinvent my practice at Harvard Law School, and hopefully I'll be successful with that. This was an amazing session. We spoke about the variety of ways in which we create value. The more imaginative we can be by creating value within the firm, for associates, and for the organization, and for clients, when how do they look at law firms as an organization when they're hiring their services, etc. So I was just reminded very briefly of this talk we had last week about the Chatham House rules applied, so I cannot say who it was, but it was the chairman of this it was board of a major American corporation, and he was asked, so how do you decide which law firm to go for when you have a matter, when you have a deal to go for? And he said, I don't go for law firms, I go for lawyers. And then the second question which followed was, so what kind of lawyers? And he said, I can't say what kind of lawyers I want, but I can definitely tell you what kind of lawyers I don't want. And he said, if you are the kind of lawyer who wants to go hiking over the weekends in Colorado, you are not my lawyer. If you are the kind of lawyer who wants to go back home at 8 o'clock, you're not my lawyer. And he has his own reasons. So this is coming from the industry where the demand is really created for lawyers to perform the way they do, or the function the way they do. Was the lawyers create value for me, lawyers create knowledge for me, knowledge is money, and if you don't provide knowledge at the right time, I'm losing money because of you. I don't want you to be my lawyer. Now, that sort of is what clients look at these major law firms today as creating value for them. But at the same time, we're also part of this legal profession where we're also thinking about ourselves and how we want to be inspired. And so totally, our discussion was completely, it was broad-based, but at the same time, there was a focus on inspiring lawyers, to be better professionals, to create value for themselves in the long term, and for the firm to create value for their clients also, which is a reasonable extension of how we do it internally. Mr. Lee made some really interesting comments on how their firm is partnering with the clients and for pro bono services, and how they're also treating all billable hours equally. Mr. Steven Zach respectfully disagreed with that, but he made some good arguments against it. Lastly, we also discussed a little bit about how most of these firms, the bigger ones, are also really global organizations. And we're not just looking to create value within New York or DC or in the United States or Europe, but also across the board for places across the 7 seas like Singapore or Dubai or probably even India or Sydney, where you want the firm to be performing and creating value across the board equally. So these are a few of the things that I took back from the discussion. It was really good. Thank you so much, all of you.
Thank you, Laura.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. I'm Laura Stein. I'm Clorox's general counsel and very proud to be active in trying to do what I can to be involved with the Center on the Legal Profession because of the awesome work it does. Hey, so our group was really focused on how we can build better relationships between law schools, law firms, and in-house corporate law departments. And I'll tell you, we had a lot of passion in our group. It was great. And we also had a lot of engagement because of the passion. And we had a great representation of academics, bar leaders, law firm lawyers, in-house. And then it was great that we had a third-year lawyer, or a third-year law student, and we had a lawyer who'd practiced 63 years. So I think it led to some really great discussion. I think one of the things that we did learn is there are so many thoughts on these issues that we could have been in the room forever. So let me throw out a couple thoughts that came in the buckets, and then the approaches we thought might be worth further work by this group and others to try to further our goal of building better relationships so we can build a better profession of lawyers as professionals and citizens. So law firms, a lot of energy about talking, some of the things that Brad was just saying about not creating the environment where young lawyers feel inspired, and therefore they're either leaving the law or they're not seeing the value in why they should not just be a professional but also a citizen who upholds the values of the law. And so, billable hour, as it happens in almost every legal discussion, was quite a topic because it creates unintended consequences. And I think there was a really great comment that was made at our table about how if what you value in your work is time and money, it impacts everything you think about, and you generally become an unhappy person. So I think someone said, you can go and hear the most beautiful orchestra in the world, and if you're thinking, I could have built $800 that I just didn't because it warps your thinking. There was also interesting talk about how law firms aren't supporting their young lawyers to become involved in the bar, to become future leaders of our profession, to take a stand on some of the access to justice and other things because of the time and money issue. And that also comments were made about how then young lawyers don't themselves want to fork over a couple $100 to do it on their own merit, don't see the value of development, maybe because they're so tied up in the time and money trap, or because, again, it's not viewed as valued. So just lots of ways and discussions about, kind of creating a longer-term focus in firms, and lots of things that can be done to incentivize and hopefully create a greater environment that drives so much of our legal profession. Law schools, similar energy. I think some of the concerns that came up as we're trying to build relationships amongst each other is kind of how, as our paper spoke, is the silo of academics from the profession often, and this trend towards increased, kind of PhDs and a real disdain for not wanting to be a trade school or not wanting to degrade the legal education. So some of the capabilities we're all saying are needed for our future leaders are things that aren't valued by many of the faculty members. And that's not true of everyone, but it was an observation. And then also, interest in having law schools be much more of a voice together with everyone as to why the best and brightest in our profession should go to law school and all the opportunities there are for you in the law and the economic advantages, because that message is just not getting out by anybody, and law school should take a lead in that. I think general counsel's got a little bit more of a pass, maybe because of some of the law firm lawyers, but clearly we were told we're not using our voice enough, we're not influencing enough. We need to walk the talk, because if we don't walk the talk, nobody's going to believe what we're saying. And that some of the challenges that firms have is that similarly in-house is not creating the time and providing the resources to really support the profession, encourage bar leadership, encourage getting involved in some of the values of our profession. So those were kind of a summary, and we again, lots of conversation. I think in terms of, kind of where do we go? What were some ideas, many ideas on how we can collaborate better. But I think, one thought was just, we have so many common goals and common values, and the value of collective action. So, William Hubbard at our table was talking about, kind of the 80% of people who have no legal representation, and so kind of how we can jointly collaborate on the underserved and underrepresented in our country. Also, clearly, diversity, but there were so many areas where we talked about if we could burst through the silos and put groups together, some of the questions about new models of the law and technology, legal education, so many things we could solve together. I think, one of the leading ideas we had at our table is doing more empirical research on the root cause, which is something, Brad, you said. So I'll quote Ralph Baxter, who said it very well. We're hearing these things that the best and brightest aren't going to law school. Why? A lot of people have opinions. Where's the empirical research on it? Second, why aren't law schools and law firms getting the anticipated outcomes that they seek? Why? Where's the research on it? And so if we can collaborate on things that'll drive kind of the view we have of our profession and continuing the special role we have as lawyers, statespeople. So in addition to thinking about just really understanding some of these key problems, because if you understand the root cause better, you'll get a better solution. We also thought there'd be advantages in studying other disciplines, like has been promoted by the authors of our paper. There was a lot of interest in our group about the medical model as one profession that we could perhaps learn more from. Bruce Kulick, for instance, talked about how if you start medical school, there is a white coat ceremony where you are just from the very get-go imbued with this kind of tradition and the important, noble responsibility you have to improve the lives of others, in fact, save the lives of others. And we're joking, maybe a gray coat tradition or something, but where is it that law students are hearing, right from the get-go about this incredible responsibility and privilege that we have to be practicing law? But also just the overall model. There was a lot of interest in the fact that, residents make almost no money. But what do they get in exchange for that? When you're a medical resident, you get incredible capabilities that'll make you much more valuable throughout your career. There was questions about, does anybody ever read a law review article other than academics? But medical journals really get followed. So there's more of a merging in the practice. So lots of things about the medical profession that we thought would be interesting to look at. And then kind of a lot of energy also, the third thing, in addition to the empirical research and the studying other models, especially medical school, there was real interest in ways we can cross-pollinate and what we can do together. And a couple areas where there was a lot of passion was, how do we support young lawyers together? How are we the voice to bring the best and brightest into law school and then make them love what they're doing once they become lawyers? What can we share and learn from each other about talent management? And how can we all own this together, the need to inspire and engage and teach our future leaders of our profession? So again, lots of great ideas and ways we could collaborate and build better relationships in doing that. And I think the final area of interest I'll point out was just that the law is changing. We've heard from everyone, we read it in the paper, the pace of change is more so than any time I sure remember in my life. And so collaboration between law firms, law schools, and in-house counsel just on what we need to do to keep serving our clients, using technology, increasing access to justice, models, all the fragmentation that's going on, that there's just a lot that's there that we can collaborate, and it needs collaboration to get the right vision for the future. So I'll just close, because I want to finish before my time's up, but somebody in our group was talking about a story about, after the fall of communism in Moscow, a restaurant worker at a McDonald's was being really encouraged to have a customer service and maybe even smile when McDonald's customers came up to the counter. And this McDonald's worker said, why do I need to do that? We have the meat. And so there was comments in our group, I can't claim the story, it was a great story though, was that, if law schools in their silo think they've got the meat, and if law firms in their silo think they've got the meat, and then the in-house law departments in their silo are sure they have the meat, we're not going to change, right? And so we need to partner and collaborate, because there's so much we need to do. Thanks so much to everybody on my group. It was terrific.
So now it's a new play on where's the beef?
The meat.
So, Peter, please.
Good afternoon. My name's Peter Williams. I'm a 3L here. And Laura did a really great job of running you guys through what we discussed and got.
Peter, introduce yourself. Sorry.
Okay, so a little more background. So,
We love Peter.
I also graduated from Stanford from undergrad. And I'm a 3L here now. So Laura did a great job of walking us through the more granular stuff. And so I thought my value add could maybe be just viewing things from a bit more of a theoretical or a higher level, teasing out some themes. So one was, I think there's definitely a theme of frustration. It was palpable, I think. But that gives me confidence, because it seems like the system is not working well for anybody. And that could mean that it's just fatally flawed, but more optimistically, I think it means that there are places to push and for improvement. And so I took a sense of optimism from that. So some of the themes that I think underlay what we discussed, one was that there's a disagreement about who's responsible for training law students, then associates, and if they don't become partner, going into in-house departments, kind of where does that burden fall? Who can do which aspect of training better? And so there are a lot of discussions about that, and what the best way to set that up is. The second is that these kinds of adjacent core competencies are very important, kind of law and approach, which was advocated in the paper. And I think that while we all recognize that this is the trend in the future and we need to accommodate that, there's some kind of core brand that I think you could maybe just reduce to kind of intellectualism or kind of intelligence, a critical reasoning that we don't want to sacrifice at law school, and that's a kind of uncompromising point. And so we favored an and or a bolt-on approach where we don't give up the things that we think make lawyers special and unique, but we give them the additional competencies they need to do well in the 21st century. A third is the billable hour, and Laura talked about this, so I don't want to rehearse it anymore, but I think that it was interesting that there was disagreement even at the table about whether this is headed for the ash bin of history and it's done, whether it'll never go away. And I don't think there's consensus about that, but I think what we did agree on is that if it is to change, there needs to be a good for business rationale in terms of pitching it, in terms of establishing buy-in within the firm. And the last point, I think, that surfaced throughout the conversation was that much of our conversation was kind of about first world problems and how do lawyers who are presumably making good salaries, how does the ecosystem work, and kind of how do we make it better? But there's recognition throughout that there is the justice gap, which I think we had all the panelists have talked about and probably pervaded everybody's conversation. And so I guess I leave that as a question is, do we think that some kind of responsibility to public service, to the indigent, to the underrepresented, is that a core aspect of our professional identity? If it is, how do we respond to that? And that filters, I think, into a lot of what the billable hour is doing to law firms, what maybe the increased corporatization of law and its practice, education for practice. So it has ripple effects, but I think it's something that's worth thinking about, even though we didn't discuss it perhaps in the depth that we could have had we had more time. Thank you.
Thank you. Larry?
Okay, good afternoon. Our topic was building careers as leaders, and we had, I think, a terrific discussion. Our group was diverse. It was composed of senior lawyers, some junior lawyers, lawyers with public service experience, government experience, and lawyers with international experience. So we had a rich discussion based upon the backgrounds of the lawyers. And so to start out, we did agree with one of the premises of the paper, and that is that our profession needs more leaders, more effective leaders. Yes, we have a lot of leaders who are great technical people, and we have leaders who are counselors, but we need more effective leaders because we have a professional responsibility to not only serve our clients, but we have a professional responsibility to make society better and to give advice based upon long-term interest of not only our profession, but society. And we're not there as it relates to some of our leadership. What do we need with respect to having more effective leaders? It was a strong consensus that we needed to have lawyers with more broad-gauged experiences. Lawyers who have done all kinds of different things. Some who have had mobility in their careers, some who've had experiences working on different kinds of things. One of the things that a lot of people talked about was the specialization. And so with increased specialization, especially in law firms, it makes it much more difficult for lawyers to gain broad-gauged experiences. There were some interesting discussion about how can we do that from a more concrete, as Ben said, how can we have more deliverables for us to consider? One of the thoughts I thought was very good is to sort of convene a summit of leaders of large law firms and GCs to talk about exactly how we can go about and make a pact. We had something like that with respect to diversity a few years ago. How could we go about and make a pact toward giving lawyers in both groups opportunities for more public service? So that I thought was an interesting thing. If you can get the right kind of people together and have a commitment that's going to stick like we did with respect to diversity a few years ago, that might be something that we want to think about. The other is the fact that our students are coming out with so many loans and high debt. I remember the fact that I was able to finance my legal education without any debt because my wife worked as a teacher, and I could pay for the tuition out of her salary. Well, no one can pay law school tuition out of a spouse's salary, especially if the spouse is a teacher. So you can't do that today. And so we talked about how we can perhaps have more opportunities for loan forgiveness, especially when lawyers are pursuing careers in public service, which would allow people to have more broad-gauged experiences. The other point is, and that we talked about, and it might help us understand how to deal with this problem of lack of effective leadership, is that what's happening in our profession really is a reflection of what's happening in the larger society. So, for example, in the business community, you have CEOs and boards of directors who are faced with pressures for short-term performances. Short-termism is something where people are looking at more profit-driven kinds of things at the expense of long-term results, and at the expense, in the business context, especially in corporations, at the expense of other constituents. And so in our profession, we are really faced with some serious issues of short-termism and focus more on short-term issues of profitability and money issues at the expense of other constituents of our profession. And so the whole idea of lawyer statespersons is something that we need to think about, and think about how that's being dealt with in the business sense. And the final thing that we talked about and spent a lot of time about, because the paper realistically discusses the fact that we have clients, we are in institutions, there are other individuals in those institutions that have responsibilities for dealing with some of these societal and community issues. And we, as a profession, really need to deal with the issue of professional courage. How do we impact our clients? How do we impact people in our institutions in terms of having the courage to say you need to be doing something differently? For example, if you have a continuum, if it's something unlawful, I think most lawyers are going to have the courage to say to their client, you can't do that, or I'm out of here. But if it's something that's just simply unethical, there are some lawyers who really don't go there in terms of what ought to be, if it's just simply unethical and not illegal. If it's something that's stupid and is simply something where the client is going to take on unacceptable risk, or is simply something that's going to be a short-term kind of consideration or a short-term fix and not something that's in the long-term interest of the client or the community, a lot of lawyers will not go there. So we talked about professional courage. I gave the example of my mentor, and that's one of the things that we are going to get to in terms of professional courage, which is Griffin Bell, the former Attorney General of the United States, where he said it's good for lawyers to sometimes not be afraid to get fired. And a good lawyer is a lawyer who's never afraid to be fired. And he would also went on to say that sometimes a good lawyer fires clients. So we need to figure out how we can get ourselves from a career standpoint in a situation where we're not being fired, we're not afraid to be fired, and maybe even fire clients. How do we do this? We talked about career mobility and opportunities for career mobility. Ben Heinemann had a great suggestion, which is we teach failures from the business school case book standpoint. We teach failures, but maybe we need to come up with ways to teach successes, because in the corporate world, you have cost pressures that are on general counsel. Managing partners of law firms have money pressures with respect to their other partners. How can we teach successes on how we moderate those kinds of forces? So I thought that was something that we need to do. And finally, I think we need to think about how we can structure mentorships, both in law firms, in corporations, and a combination of the two. So those were the main things that we covered. And since I'm the last speaker, I'm going to cede some time in the words of Professor Wilkins. Thank you.
Very good. Brandon?
Hello, my name is Brandon Whitaker, and I'm a 3L at the law school. Before going to law school, I worked at UBS and its New York, Tokyo, and London offices, and I went to undergrad at University of Pennsylvania. I'm here this morning because Peter and I are writing a paper actually on law schools and what they can do to kind of better prepare students for practice, and also what law schools can do to kind of cultivate the relationships between students so that they can take those with them when they go out to practice. So I'm going to speak a little bit about my impressions of the talk that we all had together in our group, and one of the things that really stuck out to me was this concept of professional courage, kind of knowing when something is wrong, obviously, so having the competency to do that, but then also being willing to step up and say that, and having the judgment of knowing how to say that, how to deliver that difficult message. And that was kind of talked about in the context of mentorship for young attorneys. And so as someone that's getting ready to go out and start working at a law firm, I think it would be really great to have that kind of mentorship, to be able to be around partners, and I can see when they make those judgment calls, how they talk to clients, how they kind of use their body language, how they use their past relationships, and not even just be going to parties as well, how they interact in that kind of environment in the room, how they speak to people, what's the right way to diffuse a difficult situation. Something I can think back to a long time ago, actually, when I was doing an internship in undergrad, I had a chance to work with a former AT&T executive who was working then at a consulting firm, and just the way she could kind of control the room, diffuse arguments so easily, point out the problem spots and issues, and it was really inspiring as a young person to be that close to a senior executive. And I think at a lot of law firms now that's difficult to do because they're very large, there are a lot of attorneys there, and there's not that same kind of intimate one-on-one feedback a lot of times. And so in the group we also talked about potentially having kind of senior retired attorneys taking on that role, using technology to do so, and that would allow young associates to have someone who they could talk to, someone outside of the firm, so they wouldn't have to worry about any repercussions on the inside either. And that seemed like a really great idea to me. Another thing we talked about was with the cases that was discussed a little bit, having senior attorneys come into the classroom and actually teach those cases, because they've been on the battlefield. They've seen what the horror stories are like. They've been in the situation of like, how do I say this thing to this very senior person? And so to get their kind of feedback on things from a real world perspective, so that we as students can see the types of issues we might need to face and how we can deal with them. And so I thought that was a very powerful insight. And then the last thing that we talked about, which I thought was extremely powerful, was how can we bring back that kind of neighborly feeling that used to exist in law firms, that feeling that we're all in this together, that this is our law firm, that we win our battles together and we pick each other up when we have losses. And so there was a lot of discussion about kind of making sure that junior associates feel that they're part of the firm, that when they do pro bono, that that's supported, that they have mentorship in the firm to a degree, but just like that overall sense that we're all working together, and even more so than just the firm, that we all as lawyers, as members of the bar, are in a part of a community, and that we need to stick together. So even if someone's going to go off to a DA's office, we're happy with that. Someone's going to become a general counsel of a major corporation, we're happy with that, because that person came from our firm. That person came from the same kind of educational background that we did. We've all been kind of steeped in the same kind of tradition, and that we're about something greater than just the dollar that we're working for. We're working for a greater good for society. And so coming back to that and thinking about what we can do. And so part of that was starting that in the classroom and continuing that on into the law firm and being encouraging of people as they go about their careers. And then we're always forwarding that. And so I think that was the gist of, the things that really touched me. And I hope that that, was something that would be useful for you all to think about as well.
Thank you. I just want to say we have amazing students.
Yes, yeah.
And, for all the pessimism in the world, if that's the future, then I'm all for it. So, listen, I really want to just open it up now. I'd actually asked my colleague Scott Westfall if he might ask a first question, and it fits perfectly from the themes here, because Scott, I'll just say a little bit about him, that he has worked both as a lawyer, but then he went to McKinsey, where he did professional development at McKinsey, so he could bring a little bit of the learning and perspective about how these issues are thought about in that context. He then went to Goodwin, where he really created a whole set of professional development programs in law firms and really created the Association of Professional Development, which is now thriving with many hundreds of professionals. But he's also taught here at Harvard Law School, first in the problem-solving workshop that Bill Lee and I teach in, and now as the lead and the faculty member in our executive education programs. And he is exactly the example of the kind of person that we argue in the paper that we should have more of. So with that long introduction, let me turn it over to Scott.
If you're ever running for office, right, David has to introduce you and give your nomination speech. I promise. No one does it better. Thank you, David. I'm humbled to be here. First, to thank all of you for leading these discussions. Your personal commitment to leadership and your passion and your inspiration come through so brightly in all of your comments, and I know that our students are taking that away today. I want to pick up on that theme, because one of the things that Becca in our discussion said was common to what I hear from a lot of first-year law students. They come here and they are all excited that they're coming into law school, and they expect right off the bat to hear about justice and the role of lawyers in society, how they're going to change the world, and yet we jump right into you're reading appellate judicial decisions and have no clue where the discussion is going to go every day in class, and you're pretty lost. When we end up teaching our problem-solving workshop in January, the students kind of stagger in, and several of them will say, because in the problem-solving workshop we're trying to do something different. We're trying to introduce also what the role of lawyers are all about in the cases that we do. They're so ready for that. In your presentations, each of you mentioned inspiration. Brad, you just said so much about how important it is. If you're going to be a lawyer as a professional and a citizen and an inspirational leader, you've got to build that into your organization, and you've got to have those values coming through. And Laura, you're talking about even a white coat ceremony. I love that idea. Where do we go to signal right from the beginning that this is still a profession. And Larry, your idea about profiles of courage, it reminds me of John F. Kennedy's book, right, years ago, that they were deliberate stories meant to inspire people. And what I really worry about is that we're not hearing those stories right off the bat as our students are coming in. And one of the reasons is, of course, that, based upon the way legal education has developed, many of our faculty haven't been out there in the world hearing those stories and engaging. And there's a real ripe opportunity for greater partnership with law firms, in-house legal departments, people who are working in public interest, interesting positions, government lawyer positions, to hear from those voices. And I'd appreciate hearing from each of you, an idea you might have about what could we do right off the bat to introduce that kind of a spark, a little brainstorming session here that you might envision that could give someone like Becca real hope that she's entering a real noble profession. Or if you'd rather share a personal story about how you found your own inspiration, because you are extraordinary, and I've been in the world of practice a long time. There are many lawyers who don't feel any of that inspiration or any of that obligation, which is why this paper is so important and so critical for the shaping of the future of the profession. So if you have a story about or how you got that spark, how you've become such important leaders, I'd love to hear that too.
Thank you. Brett?
I'm happy to start. When I was a 1L in 1981, I attended a lecture that was given by Arthur Lyman talking about lawyer as statesman, lawyer as public servant. And at that point, he spent a lot of his talk talking about his work in connection with the Attica prison investigation and the Attica prison report that led to meaningful prison reform in New York State. And I remember thinking, here's a person who works at a white shoe law firm in New York, Paul Weiss. Here's someone who has spent half of his time in government. He was an assistant U.S. attorney, led lots of commissions, was very involved in the community, and he had a private corporate practice, and he was a litigator, great litigator, and he led a law firm. And I thought that is a great model to strive towards. And when I was at Paul Weiss as a summer associate a couple years later, he was my partner mentor for the summer. And I just traipsed around with him, and it was probably the best 10 weeks of my life. And I left that experience thinking, I just want to be Arthur Lyman. And and Ted Sorensen was a partner, speaking of profiles of courage, and Judge Rifkind, Lloyd Garrison, Jay Johnson now, who, Secretary of Homeland Security. So I wanted to go to a firm that had a very meaningful private-public blend, encouraged pro bono, encouraged community activities, and cares about values far beyond the economic benefits one can get from being a partner in a large law firm. So I'm a believer.
Scott, I would like to just follow up Brad. My experience was not in law school, but early on at King and Spalding, again, Judge Bell, that's what we called him. We did not call him Griffin Bell. The judge talked to associates, and we had early on a meeting with associates, and he actually encouraged all of us to leave King and Spalding, and at some points in our career to take jobs in the public sector and go and become an assistant DA or an assistant United States attorney, and leave the firm and then come back, and you'll be the better for it. I don't know if the firm appreciated him with the investment they had in all of the associates, a senior partner telling us to leave the firm. But it was a great inspiration to me, a great example to me, and I think to the extent that you can give students that kind of experience and that kind of wisdom and that kind of perspective on their career early on, might be helpful.
And I just build on what both Brad and Larry said. I'd offer two things. I think one is creating a culture, whether it's in law school or young lawyers in firms, or when you go in-house or whatever your practice area may be, that's a culture where people feel they not only can survive, but they can really thrive, that somebody's got their back, that the kind of mentors that Brad and Larry were talking about, somebody's there to lift you up And how, if people aren't dying of cancer, how bad can it really be? And just really makes you think about the art of the possible. So you need role models, you need people who you look up to, but also who make you feel like you can make the difference for why you went to law school in the first place, because you feel like it's an environment where you will grow as opposed to not feel like you're reaching your full potential and talent. And then the second I'd point to, which I think we all need to do more of, is really hit home why we need to be these lawyer citizens and why we need to uphold the rule of law and the values of our profession and the importance of having a diverse profession that reflects the population at law. So, Kim mentioned earlier, we've both been on the board of Equal Justice Works. We always want to start with who are the underrepresented, low-income, disadvantaged, at-risk clients who are served, and what kind of a difference we can make, whether it's a big issue, whether it's a policy issue, whether it's an issue that is not going to require the most elite law degree, but it's going to make a huge difference in that needing person's life. So the more you can expose students and young lawyers to the benefit we can provide to making a difference. And then also just the whole diversity issue, because I think, we talked a lot about it in our group with the disenfranchisement of the general population from being able to even get legal services, and then the distrust of all of us has been a conversation that's come up. And so if we do not look as the profession that's supposed to uphold freedom of society and democracy and things that we feel we have a special responsibility for, if we don't look like the population at large, and we don't right now, we're underrepresented, we're going to lose that special role. So how we can keep making kind of real visibility of that issue.
Deborah?
I went to law school, I think, primarily because I read Simple Justice when I was an undergraduate. It's a profile of early civil rights lawyers like Thurgood Marshall, and I thought that's what I wanted to do with my life. It's obviously not where I ended up, although I had the good fortune to clerk for Thurgood Marshall, and he was, as you might imagine, the kind of inspiring role model that others have talked about. I actually had somewhat of a dilemma of conscience when David asked me to come here, because the reunion for Marshall clerks is in Washington, D.C. tonight. And I sort of thought, what would Thurgood suggest I should do about this? And I think he would have told me, the drinks will be better at the Supreme Court in Washington, and so probably will be the food, but you probably belong at Harvard. He said he wanted on his epitaph that he did what he could with what he had. And I think that's such a great philosophy for inspiring law students. There's an unfortunate tendency at Stanford, and I think at many other schools, to have the kind of on the boat, off the boat mentality. Either you're a public interest student, that's what you're going to do with your life, or you've sold out and you're going into the real world, and that's what you're going to do with your life. And I think part of our real mission is to try to break that down at every possible juncture and to inspire people who are going into the private sector to think about their public responsibilities and their obligation to nudge the world a little in the direction that that's better than the one they found. So this paper is an invitation to all of us to do that. And just while I have the floor, I want to say how grateful I am to you all for convening this group and writing the document of inspiration that brought us all here.
Thank you. So the floor is up. Bill?
So this actually is just a comment on something that Laura said and Deborah said, but maybe to provide us with some encouragement. It's Laura's comment about the medical profession. This has been announced within the Harvard community, but not broadly announced. But I think everybody knows medical education has been 2 years in the classroom, 2 years in the hospitals. And the Harvard Medical School is going to change that next year for the first time. And it's going to be 14 months in the classroom. And they've redone all the curriculums to take what was taught over a 2-year period and compressed it into the 14 months. And at the 14th month, you're going to be phased into the clinic. And so now, instead of 2 years, you're going to have close to 3 years in the clinic, but phased in with all the same substantive teaching. Now, it's expensive to do. There's a big transition. The American Medical Association watches just as closely as the ABA. But it ought to be an indication to us that it can be done, right, if you have the will to do it. It's going to be a big, big change in medical education. It's going to change the classroom. It's going to change the clinic. It's going to change when the kids get in and start becoming doctors. But if they can do it, we ought to be able to do it too.
Thank you. Fabio, did you? No? I'm not cold calling on people. Really, the floor is open, and we really do want to hear from you.
Can I ask a question while
Sure.
we're waiting for people to come to the mic? This is for you, Brad. I love the formula. It takes account of everything. But of course, the law professor in me says, well, but the devil is in the details. How do you rank order within that formula and set up priorities? And I'm particularly interested in that because I spent the summer interviewing managing partners of AmLaw 100 firms and general counsel of Fortune 500 corporations about their diversity issues. And one of the big challenges that they talked about was getting buy-in from everyone in the firm and whether to build some incentives directly into the compensation structure. And a number of them said, well, we think about it as part of the compensation model. And I would say to them, what does that mean, concretely? And do lawyers know what that means concretely? So it's all very well and good to have a formula that takes everything into account, but if people know that at the end of the day, some parts of that formula count more than others, I wonder if the informal culture isn't sort of more important than the formal formula.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. And, first of all, a confession, our system is largely lockstep. So 90% of our partners are basically clustered within partners of similar years in terms of making partner or graduating from law school. Our compensation formula or guidelines really is aspirational and reflects to a very large degree the culture and vision of the firm as we would like to imagine it. I think everything in that formula I speak to every time I address the partners at Thursday partnership lunches and more formally a few times a year. We rank everything on that list matters. And our partners are largely homegrown. Probably 85% of our partners grew up in the firm. More than 50% were summer associates at the firm. So the culture of the firm has been imbued over decades, and everyone is more or less on the same page. Very, very occasionally, a partner will violate one of our precepts. That usually requires a visit from me. It's not a visit that people like having, and it almost never, ever recurs. So we use our compensation criteria really to reflect the values that the partnership hold near and dear, and it's worked very well. And we adjust the criteria and the values every single year.
I do think this is a more difficult question for firms that don't have basically lockstep compensation system, and most law firms don't, and especially most U.S. law firms don't. And so I think this is a serious question that we have to think about, but please.
So just on that same question to Brad, how do you determine who becomes a partner using those same characteristics, and how do you weight those characteristics? Because you're, as you explained, you're in a lockstep method of compensation for your partners. But when you're weighing who becomes a partner, how do you determine and weight those characteristics?
There probably are a different set of characteristics that determine who will ultimately be invited to join the partnership. Typically, we make partners after 7 or 8 years. You expect very few associates to be business generators. You expect everyone who is going to be on the letterhead to be exceptionally bright. I will tell you, collegiality, collaboration, support, cooperation are critical. If you are not a good person, you're not going to be a partner. Because the one thing a partnership doesn't need are bad apples. It's not a fun partnership. We very much encourage, we basically insist upon pro bono work, community engagement. I can't think of an associate who's made partner at the firm who did not have very substantial pro bono matters and hours. If you're not working on it, you'll be visited by partners. What's wrong with you? Why did you come to Paul Weiss in the first place? We're supposed to be the alternative law firm. But it's a different set of criteria. And again, you hope that as you grow up in the firm, you attend enough lectures, you hear enough about the history and culture and traditions of the firm. You really hope you are imbued with those characteristics and values that we really do want to put forth and advance throughout the firm's history and into the future. We hope. It's hard.
All right, I'll ask a question. Laura, I think you said in your group that general counsel's got a little bit of a pass. And so I'm very curious about a little bit of a reaction to what Pallav said. So Pallav said that he was with a major client, and he said, you know, what kind of lawyers I don't want? Well, the ones that want to go home at 8 o'clock, the ones that, and you know, that is probably an unusually candid view of actually what many clients might not say when you ask them about what's your view about pro bono or diversity, but when it comes time to who's going to be engaged in major matters. And, you know, just to pick up on the diversity thing, I've also we did by the way, I love people talking about empirical research here. That's one of the main things we do at the center. But we did a project on how corporations purchase legal services for important matters. And we did two things. We did qualitative interviews and we did a kind of a survey. And when we did qualitative interviews and we asked people, what's the importance of diversity? They would all say, oh, it's the most important thing in the world. You know, if our law firms aren't diverse, we kick them to the curb. We fire them all the time, which seemed a little incredible given the composition of most law firms, that seemed unlikely to be the case. But then we also asked them to rank a series of factors that they looked at in order of importance, not cueing them that this was a diversity question. It was a question about how you looked at how you hired people. And it turned out that diversity was a kind of middle tier, second level consideration. And that means that unless it's entirely equal, that it's unlikely to tip the scale. So I guess I'm curious, but I'm not just putting you on the spot, although you were my student, so I'm used to doing that. But Larry, too, you know, how the general... Yeah. But how do you do that? How do you reconcile? Because you are under tremendous cost pressure to deliver more for less, to deliver results. You know, the stakes are incredibly high. You know, how do you reconcile these sets of values when you're making decisions?
You know, so much of everything comes down to kind of the smell of the place and the culture of where you are. And so, you know, I've been lucky that the two companies I've been general counsel of are great companies that are consumer-facing goods companies. And so some of the values we espouse in the legal profession are values that, you know, 100-plus year consumer goods companies espouse because it's enlightened self-interest. So like lots of things, enlightened self-interest drives a lot of good in the world. So if you're in a company that really does see the value of, from a business standpoint, of being diverse, knowing, I mean, because that's where all the growth is coming in the US, that's where all the growth is coming internationally, it makes it easier to embrace those values in your own department. And, you know, as we look at things, we care a lot in our group about the lawyers playing a leadership role in the profession in addition to being second to none lawyers. And then I want our lawyers to want to have every place in the world wanting to hire them, but they want to work here because they feel the work is great, they feel they're developed wonderfully, they feel that they're treated fairly, and they really feel that they get to make a difference. And so how we look at that is, we do ask in our, we do a lot of requests for proposals. We've historically done a lot on alternative fee arrangements, and we value relationships with firms, but we also are always looking for how we're making sure we're providing outstanding service in the most efficient way we can. And so we ask, not only what the firm does in pro bono, but what do the individual lawyers that you're proposing does work for us on this matter, what did they do in pro bono? So there's things, and we do dialogue on diversity with our firms. We, with our top firms that we have spent, we work with them on their statistics, on what they're doing, what they care about. And so, maybe then, but a big issue on everything is just opening the pipeline. So if you just have a broader view of who you're considering, you're hopefully going to get, outstanding lawyers in law firms who represent you, but also really do share your values. And so we're not perfect, but it's something we care a lot about.
Thank you. Larry, do you?
It's a great question, because most of the time, as Laura knows, that the general counsel will not hire the lawyer directly, people underneath the general counsel. But every now and then you'll have enterprise threatening matters, or matters that are going to perhaps be in the newspaper or go before the board, and you want to hire that particular lawyer yourself. And this is the business case for diversity, because in my particular situation, there have been 2 cases where I really needed to have an outstanding lawyer who I trusted, but it would have been a plus in one case if that lawyer was a female, and a plus in another case if that lawyer was a person of color. This is the business case. And Brad, in one of those cases, I hired a lawyer from your firm who was a lawyer of color, person of color. And in another case, I hired a female who then had to go before our board. So you have these considerations, but at the end of the day, you really have to hire a lawyer when a matter is going before the board that you trust. Yes. But it was a plus for Paul Weiss in your case that you had a highly competent, highly regarded lawyer of color.
Thank you.
I'll just report
Please.
that the managing partners I interviewed, there was a lot of frustration that they would produce, at the client's request, detailed statistics on diversity and the composition of the team for the client and the firm generally and so forth. And there was never any follow-up on it, and it did not look to the firm as if that were a major factor in the retention decision. So a lot of lip service being paid to it, but not a lot of practical follow-through. So I just throw that out as one small piece of evidence of progress still to be made.
Deborah, at PepsiCo, I can tell you how we handled that. We got the information and we got the stats. If it was a negative thing, we definitely would come to the law firm. But on a positive level, we celebrated the law firms who did well and who were at the top. And then each year we gave an award for William Coleman, who was the first African American on the board of
Weiss, yeah.
Yes,
Yes.
on the board of PepsiCo, and then those law firms would come to purchase and meet Indra Nui, who was our CEO, and we'd have a nice luncheon, and she would talk, and so you want to celebrate law firms who go along with the program.
Yeah, and I do want to respond as well. And sometimes it perhaps somehow it's not being captured, or perhaps again it's culture or company specific. But like if I look at our group, half of our lawyers are women, and a significant proportion, more than the population at large, are lawyers of color, people of color. And so maybe that leads just to a result. So either clients put up more diverse teams or what it may be. But also, there's a lot of effort, I think, going on. Like, there's a very vibrant women's GC group in the Bay Area where we consciously introduce to each other women law firm partners who we would trust when our backs are against the wall in the most serious matters. And so, again, it might not be something we're interacting with on each proposal, but it still matters. And if you look at many of our most significant areas of, kind of outside counsel, who's our go-to person in SEC or this or that, many are diverse. So again, each company's different, but it's something we care about.
So I think that this just underscores the importance of doing what we're doing here, which is sharing experiences and practice and research. And, this is one of the things I think that the academics in the room can do that really is part of the collaboration, is do the kind of empirical research that Deborah's talking about and the kind that we've tried to make the hallmark of the center, and then figure out ways to showcase it. So all of you will be hearing from us shortly, because we're going to have a dinner on May 12th in which we're going to be celebrating some of the women pioneers in the profession, including the first female president of the ABA and the first female president, general counsel of a Fortune 500 company, the first woman to be a managing partner of a law firm. And this is a part of the understanding of exchanging information and ideas to celebrate the successes, but also to see where the continuing challenges are. And we'll also be releasing a career studies report that we've done on the careers of women and men at Harvard Law School, which shows that even at a place like Harvard Law School, challenges remain. This has been a terrific start. I hope that we will continue these conversations. We're going to give you a break here. We've got coffee and refreshments out in the lobby here. We just ask you to please be back at 4 o'clock, because we're going to really have the culminating panel here, which helps us to think about taking this conversation to new areas. But please thank our moderators and our incredible students. Thank you very much.